What's up? I am David Long. How you doing today? Glad to see your beautiful faces. Hope you're doing well out there. Listen, maybe some of you have heard, maybe some of you haven't, but my Philosopher King YouTube page got taken down, so I've been re-uploading a lot of that content. And this video that I'm about to show you right now is an uploaded video from a few years ago after I posted my video critical of Steve McIntosh. This was kind of my afterthought sort of video. There was a little bit of talk about the potential for some debate around that, but that never really happened. Steve kind of dropped off. Since this video, I've started my What You Talking About, Wilber series.
What you talking about, Wilber?
In my video about integral evolutionary spirituality, I compare Wilber's version of evolutionary spirituality to McIntosh's version, so that's worth checking out too. This idea that consciousness goes all the way down and back and pre-exists the Big Bang.
That's a literal koan, that's not a symbolic thing.
That's his worldview based on a literal interpretation of mythology. And then on the other side, you have someone like Steve McIntosh. He also would agree with the same standard.
Harmonize and integrate science.
Science compatible.
But he also wants to postulate an exterior, loving being.
The love of God, a source of reality, which can love and be loved.
So they both are talking about a consciousness that pre-exists the Big Bang, but they're on different sides. One's this outside creator, and one's this inside awakening as the universe consciousness. So the Eastern tradition has that inside God awakening as the universe. The Christian tradition has that outside God as the creative designer, intelligent designer, and loving outside transcendent force. They are contradictory ideas, so they don't harmonize with each other. And neither one of these philosophies harmonizes with science. In this video, I get a little bit into why these ideas matter for future generations, and I explore that idea more in depth in this What You Talking About, Wilber video. If you haven't seen these videos, the video critical of Steve McIntosh and my What You Talking About, Wilber series, they might be good next videos for you to check out. So make sure you smash like down below, definitely subscribe, and enjoy the video.
What's up? I am David Long. I'm here to talk to you today about a video I made some months back about integral integrity and Steve McIntosh, unfounded claims about the nature of reality, a problematic interpretation of integral evolutionary spirituality, bad methodology, a problem of pre-trans confusion, and problems of unhealthy interpretation or translation or an unhealthy relationship with life and the world. So is it true? Is it good? Those kinds of things. Talking about this Steve McIntosh talk that I went to. So if you haven't seen that video yet, you can check it out here. And it's long, it's like 2.5 hours, so I've broken it into parts that have to do with Steve's logical argument, breaking down his worldview, pre and trans distinctions, methodology of integration, what good and bad integration looks like, stuff like that. So you can check all that out. So a lot of people have asked me, what's up with the McIntosh debate? And I was kind of letting it cool off. I had some other stuff going on in my life. It also seemed like Steve was taking it very personal, was starting to get kind of volatile, and I thought maybe give it some time to cool down. So a lot of people said that it was all edited together. You know, that it was just like, oh, this is just edited. You know, and they're probably talking about my trailer, because it's a long video. I wanted people to get the gist of it in kind of a quick, like, flashy, here's what it says kind of a thing. So I made this edited together trailer. It's like all trailers are edited. So that seemed like a weird criticism, especially when I provided the link to the original thing. And in my video, I start with stating my intentions, talking about areas of agreement. And I feel like dismissing my video as just like mean-spirited or as misrepresenting Steve's ideas is wrong. Because I'm absolutely sure that I'm not misrepresenting Steve's ideas. In fact, when you say it's edited, it's because I don't want to put words in his mouth. I am much happier letting him speak for himself. So I'll cut to him speaking for himself, and then be like, well, here Steve says this.
This is kind of my belief system. It's not a specific teaching of evolutionary spirituality.
Here Steve says this.
Is an important part of what evolutionary spirituality understands.
Well,
this is kind of my belief system. It's not a specific teaching of evolutionary spirituality. I definitely argue and believe that the universe is going somewhere, and where it's going is increasingly toward the infinite. In other words, that there will be a completion of evolution. So I'm not trying to describe it as inevitable. There will be a completion of evolution, not as inevitable. There will be not as inevitable. There will be a completion of evolution, not as inevitable.
Do these seem like they're contradictory to you? That's not like me just making claims like, well, Steve contradicts himself. I think it's actually generous, and I think it's the honorable way of criticizing someone is to quote them in context, provide links to the context, not to just say that they said something or put words in their mouth, but to let them speak for themselves. So I think that's important. Even though setting up his ideas and trying to explain his ideas before criticizing them and then saying how to do it right, that takes a lot of time before you're actually getting to your point, because you have to explain someone else's views and why they have them before you can even say why they're wrong or how you can do it better. So spending that extra time and letting a person speak for themselves takes up a lot of space, especially when you're trying to make something that's time sensitive and still include their content in context. Steve implied that I don't understand his ideas because I haven't read his books. I haven't read any of his books. I don't really want to read his books. In fact, I wouldn't encourage people to read his books. Let me read to you what he said on this comment. He says, David Long, thanks for your attention to my work. Nice. I'm willing to stand behind what I say, even though your video seems to be very keen to make me look bad regardless of the content. I don't think that's the case. I don't think I'm trying to make him look bad. I'm not attacking him at all personally. I'm only looking at the ideas, maybe trying to have a little bit of fun with them, but I'm not saying anything negative about him personally anywhere. So I don't know where he's getting that. It seems like a good way to dismiss what I'm doing as somehow nefarious. It's important for viewers to know that when an author gives a talk about a new spiritual philosophy book, it's merely a way of introducing the book itself. So my book talk is like a movie trailer for the actual book, and no responsible film critic would try to pan a movie after only watching the trailer. In order to give a general preview of a complex book like The Presence of the Infinite to a non-academic general audience in less than an hour, one has to make assertions. But those assertions are justified and argued for in the books, which has been written with an eye to the concerns of critics. Focusing your critique exclusively on my short book talk rather than my book is just a straw man strategy. If you want to responsibly critique the work for which the talk is only a preview, then you actually have to do a book review. The life of philosophy is in text, not video. I'm not willing to invest the time to make another video that responds to your video. However, I am willing to respond in writing to your written critiques of my book when I can. I can also offer to debate you in front of a live audience who can vote as to which of us has the better argument. I'm sure we'd both learn something. Okay, a few points there.
So I really don't want to spend too much time on this point, but I gotta say, it does kind of annoy me, this idea that philosophy is something that happens in writing. And I personally don't think about philosophy this way. I think about philosophy in a much more conversational way, like it's about listening and more even one-on-one communication, although definitely lectures and stuff and listening has been a lot of my experience of philosophy. But a lot of my most profound experience has been more one-on-one, and even that's kind of what I'm trying to do here in these videos, is to hopefully touch back to this more personal one-on-one kind of talking about philosophy that I've always enjoyed with some of my best friends. Maybe the reason he sees it as more of something that happens in writing is because he's a lawyer and maybe he thinks of it more legalistically. Him saying that philosophy is something that happens in writing not only makes him sound like an old fogey, it reminds me of something Socrates said, where he was saying that it's not knowledge if it's kept in external devices, making this point abdicating against writing and against books. So, maybe philosophy will take on whatever medium the time provides, I think. And in the future, in general, we might see humanity going more and more away from writing and more towards audio and video. And I wonder, does my video critiquing Steve McIntosh actually have more views than his book has reads? I wouldn't be surprised. I also wouldn't be surprised if one of the major reasons that anyone would even go to one of his book talks in the first place is because of his videos online. I bet he probably has more views online than he has people who have read his books as well. Anyways.
If we do have that debate, there's a difference between having the audience vote on who they think is right and doing more of a point system kind of a thing where we can see what arguments stand at the end of the day and if they really have any merit or not. So That's a little bit different. The other things that I want to say is he compares his book and his talk on his book to a movie and a trailer for the movie. And he says that you wouldn't be able to critique a movie based on the trailer. Okay, first of all, I think this is a false analogy. I don't think that his 45-minute talk and his subsequent half hour of Q&A is not enough content for me to be able to judge what he's talking about. In 45 minutes of talking and 30 minutes of explanation of that talk, I would think that a person would have a pretty good idea of whether they thought the person was a reliable source of information or not. Because in 45 minutes, you can make a lot of unfounded claims. You can put forward a lot of ideas that are either going to be seen as either wrong or right. Even in like a 10-minute talk, if I'm expressing premises that are wrong over and over and over, then you're not going to agree with my conclusions. You're not going to want to read my book. And you could tell that in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes of a person talking. If I listen to the trailer of the book of The Secret, I don't need to read The Secret. I already know what the problems are. It's right there in the fundamental premises of the argument. It's in the basic logic. And in his hour or so talk, I feel like I definitely got a pretty good idea of what his general ideas are. And then I got to ask him a question, which was actually 2 questions that got him to clarify his ideas in a bigger context. So not only did I get to hear him talk, I got to ask him a question to deeper expound on that, but then I also spent hours and hours editing through that video, cutting it to pieces, re-listening to the parts, studying the references that he brings up. And yeah, listening to tons of others of his videos. To act like I just listened to him talk for a little bit and I'm just strawmanning his ideas. I would like him to tell me what part of his ideas have I strawmanned. All he's really saying is that he's supported these ideas in previous books and that I need to go read those books to know what his answers to those criticisms are. Maybe so, but I will tell you that qualifying the unqualifiable, making claims about the absolute nature of reality based on personal spiritual experiences, these are things that we just know are bad methodology. We've seen it expressed thousands and thousands of times, and it's part of integral philosophy to make those distinctions and not do that. I don't need to read his books to know his arguments are bad. I've seen his arguments.
The interesting thing is, when you look at Frank Visser's actual book review of Steve's work, you will see that he makes all the same criticisms that I make. He talks about a lot of the points I make in terms of bad methodology. He makes reference to these unfounded claims in terms of cosmology and telos. But on the other hand, Frank Visser doesn't bring up a lot of the things that I do bring up, like pre-trans distinctions, how these ideas might be good or not in terms of our relationship to life. I bring up issues of theodicy, how some of Steve's ideas might apply to some classical Christian apologetics. So in fact, even though I'm not doing a book review, I'm still probably Steve McIntosh's best critic, and he just dismisses me. I think it's clear from the fact that I'm bringing up all of the issues that people who have done book reviews on him have brought up, that I don't need to read his book to be able to see that these are problems. It's clear to a lot of people that these are problems. Sure, maybe he has more nuanced ways of dealing with them in his books, and it might be interesting to explore that, but these are still unfounded claims. In some ways, I think maybe some of these issues are rooted deeply in the origins of philosophy in general. Steve is a lawyer. Steve is a rhetorician, which means he's good at making arguments for things. Whereas philosophers are good at digging to find what the actual truth is. Lawyers are good at making a case for what they would like to be true. Anyways, I would definitely encourage all of you to go check out Frank Visser's book review of his work. Tell me if we're not talking about the same things. Tell me if you think that I'm not saying all that and more. People who claim that my 2.5-hour long video about Steve McIntosh and the potential issues with his ideas is just a irrelevant straw man are not at all engaging with the points. Frank Visser sent me an email. He said, "Hi David, now that the response to your video has died out, what's your general impression so far? For myself, I'm really tired of being treated as lower level scum by superior integralists. I have not been able to have a single exchange about science where material arguments could be considered. Instead, I get lectured about formal objections to relative levels, shadow, wider frameworks, etc. All a matter of avoidance of criticism, in my opinion. What else is new?" In other words, he's saying he puts a lot of time into making these really critical, skillful, analytical distinctions about what's going on, and instead of getting real, honest, integrally informed feedback, he just gets reduced to orange or told he has some kind of shadow work to do. Listen, people, when we're talking about real issues, and it's clear from the integral methodology that there's a certain quadrant to look in for a particular type of data, psychologizing another person is a type of violent ad hominem straw man red herring. It's a strange kind of hybrid fallacy that's majorly convoluted in its own knowledge. It's a weird kind of using knowledge and the system to avoid learning or being critical.
I've distanced myself more and more from what I see as a kind of integral circus. Very good at promoting a view, even a lifestyle, using the sales language and the political slogans that go with that. But that's definitely not my game. I'm still a huge fan, and I'm also a huge antagonist. That goes well with me. I think both are useful. Science or philosophy, that grows by debate. And by listening to critics, even inviting those who disagree. Not only those who agree. That's a bit the culture in the integral world. Like, hey, we agree with each other. It's a kind of hall of mirrors, like integral confirms integral confirms integral, which is a good feeling. But listen to the people who don't agree. That's interesting. And in the end, we agree so much. Why? Disagree. That brings the clash and the insight and the qualification. That's refinement. It could be another game to say, okay, let's include the critics and see what happens. That's another game. A play can be like a tennis match, can be life and death, but it's still a game. You really try to beat the opponent. And you love the opponent for trying to beat you. That's the game. And then the game is over and somebody wins. And that's the agreement, that you should go to the utmost, I believe. Yeah, it's a man's game. We fight with theories.
If I get to debate him, I'm gonna have read all of his books. And by the way, Steve, if you're watching this right now, let's do it, man. Let's figure out when and where, and let's have it out. Eventually we're going to. There's gonna be some kind of response to this, just because I'm not gonna let it go. Other people are probably gonna bother you about it, like, hey, are you gonna debate that David guy or what? And you probably do think you're right, so what's the concern in debating me? Let's do it, let's bring it. And don't just do it for me, don't do it for you. Do it because this is what the integral community deserves. It deserves to have its ideas challenged in a rigorous way. They deserve teachers who are gonna talk about this stuff. The integral community needs to be more and more open to having these types of debates, and I think a lot of people feel that way. So I feel like I talked a lot about what the issues are with Steve's perspective in terms of how it relates to the theory and what's right or wrong about that. What I haven't really talked a lot about is why that matters to integral integrity as a whole, like the integrity of integral projects in the world. What I think integral, evolutionary, religion, and spirituality look like is totally different than what he thinks it looks like and what other people thinks it looks like, in part because of their bias and their bad integration. And of course, if you compare the way that Steve McIntosh is biased versus the way that Wilber is biased, they disagree about theory as it relates to their biases. A lot of these cosmological metaphysical issues actually are very important. I want to address a couple ideas. The first one is this idea that you got to integrate all religions, or that I'm excluding all religions. In the video I made, I spent a good amount of time, hopefully clearly, making a pre-trans distinction and trying to make it very clear the ways in which I am for including all religious symbolism, the universal ideas from all these traditions. We want to integrate skillfully. We want to find common universal thing that all of these traditions are talking about in their own language. And then we can sort of tease apart the things that are local and cultural from the things that are universal to what it is to being a spiritual human person. And I think when some people say, oh, it's the contemplative traditions, or the perennial theme, or, oh, it's spiritual experiences, you're picking and choosing the thing about these traditions that you like and trying to make it all about that. Okay, so you can integrate all, but you have to do it in a way that's overarching. You have to have an overarching methodology in a way that skillfully integrates the best of all traditions without bringing in the superstitious bullshit. And I think a large part of that has to do with retranslating the symbolism in terms of symbols of human psychology, conscious or otherwise, right? So Satan is a symbol of the ego. You have the Christian versions of the demonization of the ego, the pagan versions of the uplifting of the ego and of life. A lot of that ties back to these cosmological metaphysical themes and stuff like that. So we want to keep the symbolism, we want to understand it in a bigger picture context, we want to understand it psychologically, and we want to test the claims up against our rational knowledge. We're not going to make claims about reality based on our spiritual experiences. And that's like some of the main problematic stuff, because really at that point anything can sneak its way in, and you're back to having religion with no distinctions based on everyone's personal experience. And that's not integral, that's not healthy, that's not good, that's dangerous, that's narcissistic. Okay, there's another idea where you can just pick one tradition, and that's going to be okay. You know, it's okay if you just decide that you're going to be an integral Buddhist or an integral Christian. No, it's not. How are you going to be a spiral wizard who can speak to people where they're at, who has integral spiritual practice, if you're just picking one tradition? One tradition isn't good enough. One tradition has cultural conditioning and particular themes that are going to frame awakening in a particular semantic context for you. And if you're really going to be awake, you're going to have to transcend and include that. I mean, it's great to know about one more than the others. I mean, we all do. But to really have an integral perspective on religion is to be fluid in religious symbolism, to understand them historically, to understand them psychologically, and to understand them poetically. You want to have both the nearsighted and far-sighted view. You want to be able to hold a knowledge of the details, the nearsighted view, as well as a knowledge of the big picture, overarching themes, and have a nuanced view of these ideas in context. It's a difficult thing because it takes time to put ideas in context, for sure. But the more you study ideas, the more you start to notice that these different ideas are expressed differently from different traditions, and they all put different emphasis on them and all have different symbolic ways of talking about them. But there are universals, and we have to recognize what those are. And to be a skillful integral spiral wizard in the world is to be able to speak to different people in different symbol sets, to be able to be like, oh, you're into existentialism. That's cool. This is how you speak about this awakening in terms of vision logic, ego and construct awareness, in existential philosophical terms. Here's how you speak about it in Buddhist terms. Here's how you speak about it in Christian terms. And this is the overarching theme that is the universal similarity, this non-dual perspective, this ego construct awareness, this relationship with the individual to the absolute. Already in the world, we have what he's calling these progressive or these green or these postmodern traditions where everyone's accepted, and we already have traditions like the Unitarian Church where this week we'll have this Buddhist and this week we'll have this Christian, and it's kind of far-sighted mishmashy. Well, it's all talking about spirit, it's all love or whatever, and it's just unskillful in that regard. They're not all talking about spirit, and they're not all talking about love. One of the most important things about an integral methodology is the difference between a scientific view and a pseudoscientific view. A real integral view is not going to be pseudoscientific, it's not going to be working backwards from its ideas and trying to figure out how they might be right. A real integral view is going to be looking at these ideas for overarching patterns and themes and seeing what emerges and testing that and seeing if it holds up. Honestly, as of yet, I have not seen a single teacher under the brand name of integral who I think is talking about integrally informed religious system or integrally informed religious integration in any kind of a skillful way. I think you have people like Michael Dowd, who I mentioned in the video, who are doing really good integral interpretations or translations of these traditions and showing us what it looks like to speak the integral language of Christianity, but we are not really seeing much real skillful integration. A lot of it is still very biased, and the integral expert on religious integration has not yet come forward. The closest thing we have to it is something like Joseph Campbell. I think if you add things like pre-trans distinctions, integral methodological pluralism, and the Wilber matrix to the table with Joseph Campbell's work, you're getting very close to what an integral religious system might look like, but we haven't got there yet. Something I'm very interested in the future, because I think just like we need a healthy government system as a part of having a society, yet we haven't yet really had an awesome healthy version of it. We also need a healthy religious system as a society, and cosmology has just been evolving so fast that no religious tradition could really keep up with it. But now I think we're at a point in the integral age where we can have something like an integral religious tradition and have a built-in conveyor belt that includes the 4 S's of an integral spiritual practice and starts to teach religious literacy, poetry of religious symbolism at a very early age. I think there are issues with Wilber's conception of the conveyor belt too. I don't think that at every stage you teach a person the meme at that stage. I think kids are indoctrinated from the perspective of the parents, and at an integral stage of development, we should still be trying to teach our kids in a way that's going to help them to grow the fastest. up the spiral. And that's going to be by avoiding the pitfalls at every stage and trying to deal with them skillfully where they come up. But I mean, your kid's at an ethnocentric stage, you're not going to be like, well, racism and Christianity. No, neither racism nor Christianity. You will neither accept unhealthy racism, nor will you accept the fundamentalism and superstitious religious nonsense and guilt and fear and hell and all that kind of stuff. There are other ways to skillfully deal with people at those levels, from higher levels. And as society has evolved and matured, society has evolved and matured, more evolved and mature ways to deal with those people at those levels. And we should continue to do that. We should continue to evolve our systems so that way they are more skillful at helping people to be healthy at whatever stage of development, and also teaching them and establishing and translating that stage of development in the context of a higher understanding of what allows for fluid unfoldment through the stages. You don't want to just maintain previous expressions of stages. As the spiral evolves, the spiral's expression of the stages evolve as well. And so what a blue traditional stage looks like is going to be different depending on whether a person is growing up in a traditional society or a modern society with atheist parents, or a postmodern society with hippie parents, or an integral society with integral parents. So there's this very sort of simplistic idea about the spiral and how to understand it and maintain it. Not a lot of nuance going on there in a lot of people's view, and so when you start criticizing or rejecting different parts, people start to freak out, like you're criticizing and rejecting the whole stage when you're just criticizing and rejecting an aspect of the stage, or an aspect of the religion, or an aspect of the cosmology. We're not just integrating diversity. That's what green does. We're integrating diversity with discernment. So it's really important to be clear about that. So this is why these things matter. This is why we can't just integrate whatever we want willy-nilly. We have to think about how this translates over into societal standards that apply to everyone. This is how, no matter who you are, no matter what tradition you come from, you can get to a reasonable, integrative perspective. That's the map we're building. We're not building a, well, here's how to justify the things that I like given the integral methodology. No, we don't work backwards from our preferences and try to frame that as integral. And that's what I see Steve's project as a case for his preferences being integral, and not a very good case, in my opinion. The sad thing is that instead of hearing my criticisms and engaging with them, as of yet, he has only dismissed what I'm saying as a personal criticism about him. And I mean, I both don't care about him and love him and care about him as much as the next guy. What I'm really concerned about is integral evolutionary spirituality. It's how it is taught and perpetuated in the world. Is it really integral? Is it really evolutionary? These are my concerns. And if these are his concerns, then we both care about that. I'm going to take responsibility too. On my side, I probably too hastily made assumptions about his intentions when it came to this. So I would say that we're somewhat equally guilty when it came to making assumptions about the intentions of the other. And to some extent, when I made this video, I was like, and I don't care if Steve McIntosh likes it or not. It's not as much for him as it is for people who might listen to him. But I think in terms of integrity and standing behind your work, standing up for what you believe in, that Steve McIntosh should have a reply for my criticisms. I do want to hear what he thinks about some of these things, and I asked him many questions in the video. And I would still love to do a debate with him, or just have a talk with him that was open and fluid. I could go both ways. I would be down to have just like a thing where we sit down and I ask him a bunch of questions and see how it pans out, see how he backs up his things, criticize him a little bit and see what he says. On the other hand, I think one of the cool things about an integral stage of development is that now we're figuring out how to map conversations and debates and stuff. And so, in the same way you would map what we said in terms of logic, I think that in an integral setting could map out our arguments and see if they stand up. In other words, we would be like, all right, here's a premise, here's my second premise, here's my conclusion. And then I would say, okay, here's my problem. I take issue with your first premise, the unstated assumptions in your second premise, whatever it is like that, right? And so if I can knock down this premise and this premise and this premise, then maybe it doesn't follow that your argument's true. Maybe it goes to show that your argument is undone. And we can back that up, we can map that out, and we can, at the end of the day, come to a conclusion that one perspective is more true and good and reliable than another. So it'd be interesting. I would be interested in trying to try something experimental like that with him. I don't know if you'd be interested in that, but I think that's something new that we could bring to the table as well. That's the cool thing about integral stages of development, is that we're figuring out new ways to come to real conclusions where we don't get bogged down in might makes right, be it top down or bottom up. That's exciting.
I hope I didn't hurt his feelings.
It's not easy being green.